Hit record. All right, so we should be recording to now. Um, Hello, everybody. This is part 3 of what I think is an 8-part series now. Probably, if I come up with something, I'll add to that. Today, we're going to cover the most basic beekeeping equipment that you need when you get started with your hives. This class is part of an educational program through Harvey Beekeeping, free through the sale of honey and candles on our site. The most main agenda today is, like I said, we're going to review the equipment that that you'll need. Then we're going to talk about how the bees are really utilizing that equipment, and to give you an understanding of how the hive is organized, because the bees do organize it in a certain way regardless of what shape equipment you're using. And then I'm going to hit stop. I'm going to hit so that I'm not recording anymore, but I'm going to review the beekeeping laws for the state of New Jersey. There's some regulations that a beekeeper needs to be aware of come in when they actually are managing bees on their property. Nothing too major, but we'll review that when we get there. So to start, there's I should mention here, there's a couple different styles of hives. The hive that we're looking at right now is called the Langstroth Hive. It's the standard. This is the Langstroth is just the boxes that are stacked vertically on top of one another. This dimension where it's 21 inches by some amount, because there are some the short side is not completely standard on the Langstroth. You can have different sizes. We'll get there, but this size box with the removable frames is an industry standard. There's top bar hives, Warre hives, all kinds of things to confuse you out there. I think your book touches upon that. That would be the place to read up on that and to understand what's out there. But I'm not going to sit here and confuse you about something that you really don't even need to know about. So we're going to start from the bottom, and then we're going to work our way to the top, breaking down what we see here in this hive. Can't beat 2 cinder blocks going on the grass. Don't want to put the hive itself on the grass, because that box will rot, or come 1 foot of snow, that entrance will be in the snow, and that's, even though it's fine to have a little snow on the front entrance, that you don't want it sitting in the grass kind of thing. So this is the bottom board. It has a shim on 3 edges, and the bees can come and go in this front entrance here. They can then travel through these boxes freely and completely. There's no tops to these boxes until you get to the top of the box. The type of bottom board that I like to use are solid. The alternative to solid bottom boards are screened bottom boards, and that's what you see here, where the middle of it is just a screen, and there's a thought that helps with some disease control. That disease being the varroa mite, is a deer tick-like pest to the honeybee. The thought is that the bees groom themselves, they fall, they get below that screen and can't get back up. Recent research says that that's not completely, that's the idea, but it's in practice, it's not affecting the actual amount of varroa that's in your hive. So go with a solid bottom board, because when you're treating for that varroa mite, a solid bottom board is something that you would want to have anyway. You'd be putting duct tape around it, making sure that there's no leaks kind of thing. if you have a screen bottom board, don't have to worry about it with a solid bottom board. So I always advocate it with a solid bottom board. If you get sold on a screen bottom board, I have a bunch that I'd sell you because I don't use them anymore. But yeah, buy a screen bottom board. And then, so you're looking at here are a white box and a yellow box. It's not too hard to see that they're different sizes. What we have here is a deep and a medium. The deep box are the frame inside is 5 1/8 inch, whereas the medium is 6 1/4. It's just smaller. And that's really all that it is. There's no other reason for it other than when it's full of honey, a deep box would weigh up to 100 pounds. A medium box could weigh as much as 60 pounds at its heaviest. So that's a major difference. 3 medium boxes stacked next to each other. If you were to use all medium boxes, the way that many people do, you would just replace these 2 deep boxes with 3 medium boxes, and this hive would be the same height. The pro to using all of the same size equipment is that, yes, they're lighter, like I said, and that all the frames are interchangeable. When we get to another couple slides, we're going to talk about what does interchangeable actually mean sometimes. So I have a little note to stop sharing my screen and go to this here where I'm going to talk about the frame. Oh, can you guys still see me? Am I sharing my screen or no?
I can see you, but you're not sharing your screen now.
Okay, good. Sorry, I don't want to share my screen. So I have a box here. And this is the top. I have 5 frames. This would fit 10 frames. Okay. And then all the frames are removable and interchangeable within the box. It moves around on a little ledge here. A frame, this is mouse damage. A mouse got into this hive, and that's why I have it, is beeswax. And they're just given like a thin piece of beeswax foundation, and they'll draw and they'll make those cylinders and make that comb off of the frame foundation that we give them. If left up to their own demise or up to their own wishes, they'd fill this whole box with all kinds of wacky comb kind of thing. And we wouldn't be able to manage them because we wouldn't be able to pull them out. So it's 10 frames per box unless otherwise stated. But the standard is 10 frames. The length of the frame, the long ways, where the frame comes out like this, is always the same. And then this front side fits 10 frames, here to here, when it's like this. Is that clear that when I say about frames, I mean that each set of these boxes that are stacked on top of one another each have 10 frames in them?
Yes.
And the bees can travel up and down.
I have a question about the beeswax.
Go for it. Yes.
Do you apply the beeswax or do they do it themselves?
We apply the thin strip of foundation that's either beeswax or plastic coated in a thin layer of beeswax, and then the bees will draw that,
Got it. Yeah.
build the comb off of that foundation. So we kind of give them the center point, and then they build that out.
Okay.
So And then we have an inner and outer cover. The inner cover is really, let me just make sure I didn't skip a slide. Okay, so the inner cover is really just there to make sure that you don't crush any bees. When you put the outer cover on without it, it would be flat up against the topmost box, and you may crush bees. See this little bit of area here, this little bit of shim around this inner cover? That space is the bee crusher preventer. As each box has just a 1/8 inch worth of space around, which is the space that's big enough for a bee to travel through, but it's not big enough where they want to grow and put comb there. It's also not small enough where they fuse it together. So if you were to just put this lid on somehow and not kill any bees, it would be up against all those topmost parts of the frames, and the bees would glue that lid to the frames, and it would be really hard to pop that lid off. Sometimes in the summertime, they really do glue that lid on anyway. So the inner cover is really just a to not crush bees. Should throw a little credit out to Man Lake. Man Lake, I stole photos from today. They sell beekeeping equipment online. If you're buying a beekeeping equipment off of Amazon or Man Lake's website themselves, it's really coming from Man Lake. And they are the biggest bee supplier in the Northeast. They have the best prices, in my opinion. If you were to, just need something really quick, then they have it. I sell some equipment, but that's really only going to be for that one class. In April, I'll have equipment for sale where you can buy the whole shebang for me in one go in April. Should talk about feeders. Sometimes when you're managing the hives, you need to feed them a little bit of sugar syrup. That would be for the early spring in about March. So to stimulate the queen to lay a little more eggs before the honey flow, before they start to really make honey, you would feed them. Or during the summertime, after you harvest honey, and to prevent them from starving, you would feed them a little sugar syrup. And in fall, to get them heavy enough for winter, you would feed them a little thicker syrup to make sure that they have honey come that time. There's 3 kinds of feeders that are sold. I'd really only suggest using 2 of them. The division board feeder. I'm sorry, the phone's ringing. And the division board feeder goes in as a substitute as a frame. Just as those removable frames out, you would take 1 or 2 of those frames out. You would replace it with this tub, and the bees are able to crawl on top of this feeder, crawl down this little cylinder ladder, and then to drink the syrup that you put inside it. This feeder here, the top board feeder, goes on top of the hive. They're able to get up from the bottom. They crawl through the bottom, up through those 4 slats that you see there, and then onto the screen to drink the syrup that is on here. And then your outer cover goes on top of this so that no predators are able to get to it. And there's what's called a Boardman feeder. This Boardman feeder, you would put a jar of syrup upside down, so it's kind of like a water cooler. And then this would slide into the front entrance of the hive. The reason why this is in red is because in New Jersey, it would absolutely frowned upon to use a Boardman feeder. What that really does is it's the easiest one to use, but it's really the easiest one for a colony down the road to find the syrup and to start a, like if my bees from down the road smell the syrup out of your Boardman feeder, my bees would go and try to steal that syrup and start a whole kind of robbing frenzy around your hives that could lead to your bees being killed by um, by a healthy hive down the road, or just even a stronger hive down the road. The bees would become extremely defensive because they have to be on alert all the time. Um, so keeping drippings of syrup out of the bee yard is really key. So to prevent that from happening, division board and top board feeder, never Boardman feeder. Only time a Boardman feeder should even be bought or purchased is when, let's say you want to be overkill and use it for a water source. Fill that up with salty water and you put it right in front of the entrance. That would be overkill on a water source, but hey, that would, somebody can't tell you that you're not providing a water source for your hives if you're doing that. And we'll mention water sources with the beekeeping regulations a little bit. Under of other equipment, there is a ton of different hive tools that you can buy. I own both of them. These two here. This one here is the kind of a standard with this hook. This hook, you would pry the frame out, and so that you can lift it straight away, straight out. This little edge here is to push some frames over, push frames over, and then you're able to use that hook a little easier. And then the blue and the red on either side of here are, I'm pretty sure they're just sheetrock knives, or they're used in carpentry. You can get them at a hardware store probably for much cheaper than anybody could sell them, in a beekeeping supply shop. And it's literally just a crowbar, just to pull apart the hive. And this is really what I use most of the time. I lose more hive tools than I can, even keep track of. I'm pretty sure Rob, that's on this call, has one that I dropped in his bee yard the last time I was at his bee yard. So yeah, buy 3 hive tools when you're buying equipment, because you'll probably lose one. And then most important is the smoker. You can substitute a hive tool with a pocket knife, but you can't substitute anything for your smoker. Your smoker is the biggest and best tool that you have in the bee yard. That a small smoldering fire is started inside this, bellows, puff it up a little air, and a cool smoke is puffed over the bees. And that's really key to proper management of the hive. And then there's all kinds of bee suits that you can have and you can purchase. Basically, I like the ones that it's a denim jacket with the bee veil zipped into it. I don't wear gloves. When I do wear gloves, I'm wearing nitrile gloves, which is kind of like a thin a thin glove that like a doctors wear. I wear a pair of long pants and high socks when I'm working. But there's been days where I've harvested honey in shorts and a t-shirt, so and a baseball cap. What I'd suggest is in your first year to buy the denim jacket with the bee veil that doesn't have the bottom, because you probably own a pair of jeans, and with that combination, it's much cooler You're not going to overheat in some of these big onesies that they sell. Definitely buy a pair of beekeeping gloves. It's a pair of leather gloves that aren't treated with formaldehyde. Some work gloves at the hardware store are treated with formaldehyde, harmless to humans, but that little bit of a smell, the bees kind of freak out with. And yeah, you definitely want to own a veil, gloves, and you know, be wearing long pants the first time that you enter a hive. And then as you get comfortable at a personal preference, you can lose the gloves when you want to lose the gloves, that kind of thing. I found for my personal use, I get pretty clumsy with when I'm wearing beekeeping gloves. Other equipment, I would say there's mouse guards, which is really just half-inch hardware cloth pressed into the hive to make sure that mice can't walk into it. Only used in the fall to springtime. Come April, I'm going to be removing my mouse guards. There's this double screen. This double screen allows you to take a weaker hive that's in the apiary and put it above a much stronger hive. And that would allow that stronger hive's heat to rise and then go into the weaker hive, keeping it warm. So let's say you have two hives in your bee yard, one's weaker than the other. You can literally just put that weaker hive on top of the stronger hive and you're good to go. You can open the entrance for that weaker hive to have a bottom entrance, and that's good. I store equipment on these boards in the bee yard, so they're always there, kind of thing. So extra equipment is stored on my double screen, and then when I need it, I'll figure out a way to protect the bottom of my boxes from mice, against just, you know, protect my equipment from mice while I'm using the double screen. That's a problem that, you know, I'll face when I get there. I'm going to backtrack here and go to this photo. And I'm very sorry that I didn't include this in a slide, but I really should tell you what of everything you need for a hive, what ratios. So obviously you need a bottom board, you need an inner and outer cover. Then you also need 2 deeps worth of equipment. If you're going to go with only managing your bees in mediums because of the weight, you would need 3 mediums. And then you would also need 3 additional mediums that are used for honey supers. So a total of 5 boxes, deep, medium, medium, or a total of 6 mediums. I'm going to make a post in the Facebook group kind of writing all that out, because I'm sorry, I really should have had this as a slide. We're going to go to talk a little bit about the standard on frames. The box that I showed you just earlier is a 10 frame box. That's the absolute standard that it just makes the most sense. When you start using 8 frames, you have to get the hive taller, and then you have to deal with converting some of your medications that you're used into, because it's all 4 10 frame boxes. Excuse me. And I don't see any value in it other than the box is a little lighter. But even then, when the boxes are heavy, you can just take a frame or 2 out of a 10 frame box, and it's just as heavy as a 8 frame box. But they're out there and you should know about it. So there's 10 frame boxes, and 8 frame boxes for production colonies that exist in the hobby, in the job, in the industry. What I use 10 frame boxes and 5 frame boxes. See here on this photo, this is a 5 frame box on top of a full size 10 frame colony. These 5 frame boxes are interchangeable with nucleus colonies. If it's 5 frames or less, it's called a nucleus colony. If you have more than 1 box or even 3 boxes on top of this 5 frame here, that's still considered a nucleus colony. So it's just a difference between 10 frames are the standard for production colonies. 5 frames are the standard for nucleus colonies. I have some 4 frame nucleus boxes, really just because I was given them. So there's just that difference there, and that's just to know what that is. If you were to buy a nuke from me, it would look much like the box here, 5 frame nucleus box. And that's something that you'd be getting. That box itself is worth $15. So I want to talk about how the bees organize the colony with inside all of those boxes. So there's 2 terms here. There's brood box and honey super. So there's a lot of people that will call a medium. They'll call that a honey super, regardless of what it's being used for. And they'll call a deep box a brood box, or they'll call a deep box a deep honey super, something silly like that. The difference here is that a honey super is a place in which honey is stored for harvest. That's how I'm defining it. A place in which honey is stored for harvest. So there's 3 things in the hive that the bees put into the frames. That's brood, pollen, and honey. We know from the first life cycle video, brood is where the queen is. She's laying eggs, and she's raising all of the young. Pollen is the protein source of the hive. Honey is the carbohydrates of the hive. The way they organize their hive is like a hard-boiled egg that you overcooked a little bit too much. All right, so stay with me here with this hard-boiled egg analogy. You have your yolk inside, and that's your brood. That's the good stuff, the yellow stuff in your egg. This is where the queen is, and that is where all your developing bees are, all your nurse bees taking care of them. The pollen is organized by a thin layer around that brood. And that makes sense because the pollen is needed to raise that brood. And then you have all the carbohydrates stored above the colony. All right. So here with these really tall colonies, you have a bunch of honey above the hives. And what that is because during winter, they'll slowly rise up, consuming honey, and come March, they'll be at the top. Not that all the way at the top. That's why they do it. That's why they store it above them. So the hard-boiled egg, the yolk is the center, and that's the brood. The pollen is because you boiled it a little bit too much, and there's that thin, nasty layer of green on the yolk, and the honey is the white. And that's the way you got to think about it. And that's how really they'll organize it all the time. Depending on the size, they'll manipulate the circles a little bit. Like this one is a little bit thinner. This queen went up a little higher and not as wide across. but it's always within these same rules of thumb. They're not going to put honey in an entire frame right in the center of the brood nest. I told you that I was going to come back to the value of interchanging frames. Sometimes a queen can lay eggs and just chimney all the way up and down your hives and laying inside your honey supers, in the honey supers being the place in which you're going to harvest honey. All these boxes above the bottom two is where I'm going to harvest honey from. So sometimes the queen can come up and lay in this pink one, this green one, and this blue one, and then come back down and lay in this white one, and then lay in a thin circle here. And then there'll be a thin layer of pollen around her. And then there'll be the layer of honey all around that in a big U. So if all the frames were interchangeable, I can take those frames that have brood on them, put them down in the bottom box, put the pollen around them, and then put my honey on top of them, like reorganize it on them. Reason why I'm trying to set this straight so much is that to not confuse you, that sometimes there's times a year that you're not allowed to have honey supers on the hives. And the only boxes that are on the hives are brood boxes. So in this left photo, the only boxes that are here are brood boxes. I'm using a medium box below 2 deeps just because that's the equipment that I had at the time to service them. So they needed another box, and I gave them this brown one, and they went into winter with these 3 boxes. Standard would be 2 deeps. In this right photo, I have a deep box all the way at the top here. This deep box is a honey super now because I'm going to harvest honey from it. Let's say I harvest that honey from it and I bring it to this bee yard and use it as this white box. Now it's a brood box. It's no longer a honey super. So it was always a deep, but it was not always a honey super or a brood box. That's kind of language that is important when you're asking questions about the management that you're doing, and you're trying to talk about what you're doing. And if you were to go to another talk, like when I talk about disease, I'm going to be talking about the brood box. Honey supers need to be off. Well, if you thought that only mediums were honey supers, you would be taking this box off, and that you'd be very wrong. Same thing on the frame. Brood in the middle, thin layer of pollen here. So see this empty space? And then you have your honey on the outside of that. So this white cappings is capped over honey. This thin layer here was pollen. Those cells are open for pollen storage. And then you have your developing bees right in the center there. So that egg yolk is continued to represent inside even with one frame. If it was a 1-frame colony, you would see this organization. So I want to open it up to questions. That's Hank. Hank is the best pup. I'm gonna stop recording.